Intersectionality of removing barriers in STEM, a Hispanic serving institution, is part of our research project, HSI Hub, Intersectionality as Inquiry in Praxis, Race, Class, Gender, and Ethnicity for Student Success in STEM. This research project, as well as this panel, are possible thanks to our funder, the National Science Foundation, and especially to our program director within the National Science Foundation, Dr. Sonia Montaz-Hunter. Today's panel speaks directly to chairs of departments and directors of programs in STEM in colleges and universities. These chairs and directors come from many places. Our online community, for instance, come from throughout our sister schools in CUNY, from NYU, Northwestern University, University of California, Irvine, and from the Dominican Republic, from Universidad Tecnológica de Santo Domingo, better known as INTEC. I also want to welcome my co-principal investigator from the University of New Mexico, Dr. Nancy Lopez, professor of sociology and director and co-founder of the Institute for the Study of Race and Social Justice. And my co-principal investigators from the City University of New York, Dr. Maria Isabel Roldós, associate professor and director of the CUNY Institute for Health Equity at Lehman College, Dr. Joel Rodriguez, professor of physics at Hostos Community College, and Dr. Antonio Valeras, professor of psychology, also at Hostos Community College. I want to welcome the panelists and all of you for taking the time to come to the City College of New York, the oldest public university in New York City, and a proud member of the Hispanic Serving Institution Large family. I want to extend a special welcome to my associate dean, Dr. Kevin Foster, and my chair from the sociology department, Jana Kucheva, for being here. And now, without further ado, I want to introduce my co-moderator, Sara Marrara, trained in demography and health disparity, who has been crunching and analyzing numbers from left to right at the CUNY Dominican Studies Institute for over a decade. Sara leads the CUNY data team for this research project. Bienvenidos, and let us begin. Sara.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you again for joining us in person and on Zoom. I have the honor of introducing our first speaker, Dr. Stephanie Hernandez. Dr. Hernandez is an assistant professor in the Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics at the Dornsife School of Public Health at Drexel University, where she joined as part of the Drexel First, which is the Faculty Institutional Recruitment for Sustainable Transformation program. Dr. Hernandez is a fellow demographer whose research seeks to document, understand, and address sexual and gender minority, SGM, health inequities. Currently, her research agenda spans 3 areas, including operationalizing intersectionality in SGM health research, examining socioeconomic disparities and their association with health in SGM populations, and incorporating biopsychosocial approaches to better understand SGM health inequities across the life course. Prior to joining Drexel, Dr. Hernandez completed her postdoctoral training at the Carolina Population Center at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Dr. Hernandez received her PhD in Applied Demography from the University of Texas at San Antonio and a Master's of Science in Demography and Bachelor of Science in Sociology from Florida State University. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Hernandez.
Hey, how do we get the slides? Yeah. They're showing on this computer. There they are. Thank you. I'd like to start by saying thank you for the warm introduction. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm really excited that it was not raining this morning. In Philly, it's been pouring for like the past 5 days. It's been miserable, so I was lucky enough to not be caught in the rain. Today, I'm excited to shower you all with some data. I think, Sarah, you might be excited about this and define intersectionality and talk about some of the strategies that I think can help us start eliminating and addressing some of the institutional barriers to STEM participation at HSIs. But I want to start by kind of acknowledging where we're at right currently in our environment or at higher ed institutions, right? We have seen currently and in the past years a systematic dismantling of DEI and anti-racist policies and practices at universities across the nation. I mean, it's surgical, right? We've seen the introduction and passing of laws that are anti-DEI. We've seen measures like Don't Say Gay in Florida expanding. We've seen anti-woke laws. We've seen just 2 days ago in Texas, the firing of staff, right? Over 60 people fired simply because they do DEI work, right? And so we cannot have this conversation today without acknowledging the state that we're actually in, right? None of us operate in a vacuum. Our students definitely don't operate in a vacuum. And we're going to be talking about power and social justice, and we have to acknowledge, right, our current political environment and the war on so-called wokeness and DEI efforts across the country. And so I want us to keep that in mind as I start my talk and as my fellow panelists do their talks and we go into the Q&A. So I'm going to introduce myself and kind of give you my background, which was covered in my bio, but mostly I want to do that so you all have a perspective of where I'm coming from, which is public health, right? And not STEM. And we may do things differently, we may not, but also to share a little bit of my lived experiences, right? Operating in PWIs, which is HSIs, and as a Latina, right? As a queer person, as a daughter of immigrants, as a first-gen student, my own experiences have impacted how I do this work, right? And why I choose to approach my work from an intersectional lens. I'm going to very quickly show you some data, right? Because a demographer never shows up to a party without data. Come on. I'm going to define intersectionality very quickly, just a quick primer, and talk about 2 key tenets that I think are crucial for the work that we're going to be doing. I'm going to summarize barriers, and then I'm going to take up the majority of my allotted time today talking about these strategies that I think may help. And I'm excited to hear your thoughts on it. So again, I won't go over my academic background, just to say that, you know, I am coming from a sociology background, a demography background, and now these days I'm in public health, right? And the ways that we apply intersectionality, you know, sometimes are devoid of critical thinking. We sometimes forget what the origins of intersectionality are. We struggle with how to apply intersectionality, and we're going to see some of that today, right? And I'll talk about it in a few slides, how difficult it is to actually do work. I'm not going to say right intersectionality work, but how difficult it is to actually be intentional about doing intersectionality right? And so as I talk about this, full disclosure, I'm not in STEM, but I'll tell you a story about how I thought I would be a great engineer, and the systems of impression kept me down at the very end. Let's start with some data. So I'm going to be presenting some data from the National Center for Education Statistics, and I want to tell you a little bit about this data before, right? Always caveats. So these race and ethnicity data are presented by citizenship status, and this has to do with the way that financial aid is distributed. So that's why these data are presented like this, and it's going to be available for U.S. citizens, permanent residents, and non-residents. So for this population, right, the first question that comes to mind, well, what about undocumented students and DACA recipients? And so you're going to see these students reflected across the data. So they are there in these data. The second thing that is really crucial here is that race categories exclude people or persons of Hispanic ethnicity. Again, crucial for our population of interest, right? What does this mean? Our Afro-Latino students are always going to be captured in the Hispanic category. That makes the study of the experiences of Afro-Latino students, for example, and students, Latinos of other races, pretty much impossible when we have data that is presented in this manner, right? When we analyze it first by ethnicity and we exclude a racialized experience. So another caveat for these data, these are some of the STEM fields that are going to be, so when I talk about STEM, these are the STEM disciplines that I'm going to be talking about. So biological and biomedical sciences, computer and information sciences, engineering and engineering technologies, mathematics and statistics, physical sciences, and science technology. So for the chairs and the deans in the room, these are the specific disciplines that these data refer to. And finally, really importantly, these are US level data, right? So like this matters for the context that we're in, right? We're in New York, we're in a Hispanic serving institution, this matters for Bruin versus urban, like this matters, right? But these are the data that we have for today. And so these are a lot of things to keep in the back of your mind as I'm gonna present some of these trends. And I'm gonna do this fairly quickly because I'm already 6 minutes in and we gotta get to the good stuff. So let's talk about fall enrollment. And the key thing that I want you to take away from this is this dash green line, which is the projected number of Hispanic students by 2031. And this is across all disciplines, across all levels, undergraduate, graduate, at all US degree granting post-secondary institutions in the US, right? So it's a very big pot. And by 2031, Latino and Hispanic students are projected to make up 1 in 4 students at institutions of higher education. 1 in 4. Right now, we're about 1 in 5. Again, in some institutions like HSIs, this is the reality, right? You need to have 25% Hispanic students. Is that the graduate and graduate level? I'm not sure. Someone clarify that for me. But this is going to be the average by 2031, right? So this presents a unique opportunity, and I'm going to wrap up by coming back to this. And then you see some of these other trends for other racial and ethnic groups in the country. And I do note here that these data have been adjusted for the COVID pandemic. So just another caveat there. This is a distribution of degrees, STEM degrees and certificates earned over time. So starting with the 2012 academic year, we have seen an increase in the number of degrees awarded in these STEM disciplines that I discussed earlier. But we're going to start seeing this by race, ethnicity, and by sex, which is what we're really interested. But I wanted to give you first an overall picture of what this looks like. Let's look at this by race, ethnicity first. And the first thing that should really catch your attention, right, is the big difference between the green and the blue bars. So the green are always going to be the Hispanic students, and the white are always going to be the non-Hispanic white students. For the rest of the bars, the graphs that I'm going to show you. And this is total, all degrees and certificates, and I'm going to break it down a little bit further. And some general trends here, we have seen an increase in the number of Hispanic students earning STEM degrees and certificates, which is really exciting, right? Again, it presents an opportunity that if we're doing this work right, this is exciting. This is very exciting. But it also is kind of scary, right? So as we see the number of Hispanic students pursuing STEM degrees, and we're not doing the work right, what does this mean, right? So we're going to sit with this for a little bit. Let's look at this by race, ethnicity, and then sex. And sex is measured here as sex assigned at birth, not gender identity. All right, again, so the Hispanics are always going to be in green, and the white, non-Hispanic white are always going to be in blue. The males are going to be in the lighter shade, and the females are going to be in the darker shade. And again, this is total. So similar pattern, right? We've seen a gradual increase, but we start to see a little bit of sex differences. Let's look at certificates only, and this might be of interest for folks that are in departments that lean heavy on certificates, right? Versus departments that might be bachelor degree heavy. this is kind of interesting. So over time, pretty steady number of certificates or percentage of certificates earned by Latino students. So over the past 10 years, this trend's stable over time. And this was surprising to me, you know, given the COVID pandemic. I'm curious what we're going to see now with the 2022 academic year, 2023 academic year, if we're going to see a downward trend. But pretty stable over the past 10 years. Let's look at associate's degree. I thought this was the most fascinating, and I was not expecting this. Latinas, okay? We're seeing a huge increase in the number of Latinas graduating with associate degrees in STEM. I'd love if anyone is in the department that this is fascinating to me. I have no idea why. So please don't ask me. But this shocked me. And the other obvious trend here is the decrease in the number of white female students pursuing or graduating with STEM associate's degrees. So these trends here were stark to me. So the pattern is different. For Hispanic students, we have more female students graduating with associate degrees. And for white students, we have more male students graduating with associate degrees. And then finally, the biggest thing that should stick out to you here with bachelor's degree, one is the bars. I'll flip back and forth. So, you know, here's the associate degrees. The difference between the blue bars and the green bars, you know, they're wide, but not that dramatic. When we start to look at the bachelor degree, that the widening of the gap between the folks who get to graduate, right, make it all the way to earning a degree in STEM versus those who did not. And you know, of course, there's plenty of data on folks who, like, you know, start a major and don't graduate, and I don't have those data here. But the good news is that, you know, in 2012, the 2012 academic year, we have, you know, 9% of degrees earned were to Latina Hispanic students, and by the 2021 school year, you know, 15%. So we are seeing, again, this gradual increase in bachelor's degrees earned by Hispanic students, particularly Latinas, but it's not to the same extent that we saw it at the associate degree level. So again, something to keep in mind. So what is intersectionality? This is the wonderful quote that's guiding or definition that's guiding Dr. Hernandez's research and the rest of the team and the grant. And really, and I'll use a more simplified description. In essence, intersectionality is a way of thinking about identity and its relationship to power. And if you take anything from my talk today, is power and social justice. That's all I want you to take home. It recognizes that people's lives are shaped by their identities, relationships, and social factors. Key things here, and that these combine to create intersecting forms of privilege and oppression, depending on a person's context, to existing power structures such as patriarchy, ableism, colonialism, and all these other isms that I'll display on another slide. We know that the development of intersectionality, you know, did not start in academia. And that was one thing that I've learned even in my own training, right? I was learned that Kimberly Crenshaw coined intersectionality in her seminal paper. And just recently, I began to learn the non-academic roots of intersectionality. For example, with the statement from the Combahee River Collective, seminal piece of writing. I'm like, why didn't you teach me this in school? So I can't go anywhere without talking about these Black lesbian women who wrote this amazing intersectional piece of writing before Crenshaw introduced intersectionality in academic writing, right? So something that we also have to continue to do is re-educate ourselves, right, on like the roots of intersectionality. Other key things to think about is the core ideas of intersectionality, and these are summarized really simply into 6, you know, social inequality, power, relationality, social context, complexity, and social justice. And I think what we do really well is we do number 1 really well, right? And we do the intersection route. You know, we do like Latina and queer really well, or you know, undocumented and low SES really well. So number one, we do really well, but I think where we sometimes lack in applying intersectionality is we forget the power, one, and then we forget that intersectionality is all about the advancement of social justice. If we're not in the pursuit of our social justice, then and the intersectionality is not the lens, and we could pick another lens, right? That perhaps is more appropriate for the work that we're doing. But it's all about social justice. So when I'm talking about these core ideas, if I didn't talk about social justice, check me and remind me, Stephanie, how was this linked to social justice? Because if it's not, then it's not an intersectional approach, or it's not an intersectional lens. And this is very quickly how we can apply some of this when we think about sex and gender and sexual orientation and these like identities, right? We always start as the intersection between sex and gender or sexual orientation. And maybe, you know, someone is female or a sexual minority or is racialized or, you know, undocumented. And instead we need to ask ourselves, what are these systems of power and oppression that put people at risk for poor health, for, you know, lack of access to quality education, and say, name it, right? It's sexism, transphobia, heterosexism, racism, xenophobia, classism. This is the part that we're lacking sometimes, especially in my own work in public health, and the work that we need to be bringing back as we apply an intersectional lens, right? Moving past just sex and gender or intersecting identities and talking about the systems that then place people at risk for X outcome. So some of the key, you know, barriers that exist among and I'm going to just use Latinx moving forward, STEM students, you know, include lack of representation, and I'll provide a strategy for this, lack of support networks, lack of community and mentorship, differences in cultural and linguistic norms. And I hate that word norms, right? Because norms to who, right? When we're talking about power, it's like, who sets the norm? Socioeconomic challenges, including tuition, textbooks, you know, cost of living, stereotype threat, right? And not having professors that immediately believe like that they can't make it, or what does it mean to be a biologist or an engineer or chemist, and institutional biases and inadequate resources. And I have a list of all these, but I am running out of time. So let's just go into solutions. And when we're thinking about applying intersectionality, a few things that we need to remember is, one, to be aware of flattening, and that's when we're only talking about these intersecting identities and not talking about these systems of oppression that I listed in these other slides. We need to center the voices and experiences of Latinx students in this specific example. We need to avoid treating Latinx students as a monolithic group. And one of the ways we can do that is by collecting the right data, which again, Dr. Hernandez and the rest of the team are working out, which is really exciting. And of course, we need to emphasize power in the advancement of social justice. So let's talk about how we can reduce some of these barriers. And I'm going to talk about 4 examples. And these are like major ideas, right? And again, you know, I'm just a second year assistant professor. You know, the rainbows and butterflies have not been of academia have not been taken out of me yet, right? Maybe by year 3 or 4, I'd be like, but like I still see like some hope in academia, right? And so some of these, I must admit, come from like this maybe naiveness, right? Of that academia can be a place where we can transform lives, right? And so strategy number 1 is that we have a responsibility to design an inclusive and empowering curricular experience from day 1 through graduation. And what does this look like? And I have some, let me go to my notes. Here it is, okay. So we need to create welcoming and inclusive classrooms. And so mostly this looks like in introductory classes. I'm talking about intro to biology, intro to chemistry, you know, those 101s. I remember in my intro to biology class, I had a professor who said, you know, he said, it was like 100 people in the class, and he said, 10 of you stand up. And then he said, okay, the 10 of you standing represent the only people who are going to get A's in this class. So adjust accordingly. I failed that class and I was not a biology major anymore, but hey, You know, things like that are not exactly welcoming. And so that's something that comes from the top down. You know, anytime I have a chance to talk to my dean, I you know, jokingly, not jokingly tell her, you got to get your A+ faculty teaching these intro classes. You know, the faculty who, again, still naively believe in academia and like the power to change lives and like love working with students. And that also means rewarding, you know, whether it's course buyouts, whether to redesign a class, it's financially, it costs money incentivizing faculty to teach these introductory level classes that are fundamental to getting students interested in STEM classes, right? And then, you know, as we continue in the major, it's not only intro, and then it's, you know, sophomore, junior, and then graduation, senior year. It's modifying the curriculum to reflect the lived experiences of students of color. So, you know, being intentional about the guest speakers that you're bringing in, the textbooks that you're using, the articles. You know, if you're having a panel of biologists, include at least one non-white person. Like, you have to know at least one. And it's hard. Like, like, I don't understand how that is so hard. Find one non-white person. And you have to be intentional about it, you know, partnering up with your student resource centers on campus, your LGBT student resource center, your queer student research center, and saying, you know, I want to create an event for my freshman intro biology class on being out as a biologist in the workplace. Can we partner up? Intentional partnership, not this co-opting, not this what do we call it when we take something from people? Extractive, not this extractive where we're just gonna put a rainbow on something and call it queer. No, intentional working with organizations on campus because they're here, right? It's funding and advocating for those groups when they're being canceled across campus, like what we're seeing in the University of Texas, those type of opportunities. It's providing access to first-year experiences such as learning communities and other co-curricular programs and additional support through graduation, finding opportunities to partner with identity-specific groups. You know, I love to meet a Latina chemist. I've never met a Latina chemist, honestly. So if you know someone, connect me, please, because that would be really cool. It's building some strong support networks, right? And that looks like, you know, retaining and recruiting staff, right? I'm sure you all have seen this. And here I highlight the number of Latinx faculty, right? I mean, I've seen this since I was a graduate student. I was like, why the heck will I join academia when this is what I'm signing up for, right? When you can count on one hand the number of Latinx faculty in your department, that's sad. And it's the retention, right, of faculty. It's not only bringing in junior faculty who then mentor every Latinx student because there's only one of you. It's the retention of quality faculty. Again, putting those resources where your mouth is, right? And that is from the top down, right? That's not from like the junior faculty member spending all their time faculty mentoring all the Latinx students. It has to come from the dean to the chair down to the faculty and then to the student. I'm gonna rush through these two, but we can talk more about this in the Q&A. Is broadening Latinx STEM participation through intersectional recruitment and admissions. What does this look like? This comes from the literature on the higher ed literature, which I find fascinating. Again, not being a higher ed person, on institutional change agents, right? So these are people who literally take it upon themselves to change their institutions, which is so unfair. So again, if we were to take that model that works really well, but take the onus off of that faculty member and put it on the institution, what would that look like? So on admissions, some models that have been working are having an equity review officer during an admissions committee, or reassessing what it means to have, if you failed, you know, your intro chemistry class or your intro calculus class, why, and reassessing those weed out classes. And then finally, integrating Latino students into STEM and academic professional networks. Money, folks, it takes money. Paying for these undergrad students to go to conferences with their faculty mentors. It's gonna cost money, but they need to be taken with their faculty members to see themselves represented as future biologists, as future chemists, as future engineers. you need to invest and put your money where your mouth is. To wrap up, it takes investment, it takes money. And I'm gonna wrap up there and leave room for questions. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, doctor Hernández. Muchísimas gracias. We are now on our second panelist, and it's just a pleasure to introduce her because she comes from home, our own institution. Dr. Adriana Espinosa is an associate professor in the Department of Psychology at the City College of New York and the Graduate Center at the City University of New York. She received a PhD in economics from the University of California, Berkeley. Dr. Espinosa leads an interdisciplinary research program that centers on the examination of salient factors that create, maintain, and exacerbate health and social inequality among Hispanic, immigrant, and others minoritized populations. Her work is grounded on an intersectionality framework that identifies interconnections between socioeconomic, environmental, cultural, and psychological determinants of disparity in health and adaptation among Hispanics and other minoritized, my glasses are failing me, groups. She has numerous years of experience leading or collaborating in projects aiming to reduce social inequality among Hispanics and other minoritized individuals through their increased representation in STEM fields, and has mentored over 30 students and early career individuals from backgrounds underrepresented in health sciences, biomedical research, and other STEM fields. Con ustedes, la doctora Espinosa.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Hernandez, for that introduction. So I have been in academia a little longer than my co-panelists, and I think I'm still also hopeful that we can make changes in academia. I guess I'm also living in that butterfly world, but I do believe that, there is something very important happening, aside from the horrible political climate that we are living in, that is really just highlighting the importance of work like this. And I'm very, very happy and energized to be in a room with people that are interested in this topic as well and want to have this conversation, because this conversation is not one-shot deal. This is something that we have to have for a very long time. And so as Dr. Hernandez said, intersectionality is one of the pillars of my research program. I predominantly look at intersectionality or intersectional disparities on the health front, health outcomes, but a lot of the frameworks that we discuss in that for looking at health disparities also apply for disparities in STEM and for the diversity and inclusion of individuals. And there is actually a connection between the disparities in the STEM workforce and in health as well. So we need to also think beyond just the one area and for when we look at the diversity of individuals. But before I begin, the next slide is, first I want to acknowledge that we are working in borrowed land. And I would like to recognize the unique and enduring relationship that exists between the indigenous people and their traditional territories, and acknowledge that we are in the historic homeland of the Lenape, forgive me if I'm saying it wrong, Lenapehoking tribe within the traditional territory of the Lenape Nation, and particularly recognize that the City College of New York is one of the many institutions in New York City that were founded upon the displacement of the Lenape and other indigenous people. So I wanted to begin, so the next slide is just going to give you an overall introduction of intersectionality as introduced into the academic front. Certainly intersectionality as a concept, as an idea, precedes Kimberly Crenshaw, who first introduced it into the academic setting in the late 80s. And the topic was really mainstreamed in the Women's March in 2017. And intersectionality really is it's a theoretical framework that highlights that the markers of inequality by gender, class, race, disability status, and many other identities are inseparable. They are seldom experienced in isolation. And trying to separate them or treat them as discrete experiences, right? The discrimination or the intersectional exclusions that people face, the people with multiple intersecting identities, trying to treat those experiences as discrete it's really a failure. It failed according to Crenshaw's paper in protecting Black women who were suing for workplace discrimination. And it really doesn't reflect the fact that the whole, so this intersectional experience is much larger than the sum of its parts, right? So that's the whole idea of intersectionality, is really looking at the whole rather than one particular identity. So for example, I am a woman. Yes, I identify as a woman. I am also Hispanic. And I also have special needs. So if you see at the intersection, I have a disability. So if you look at the intersection of all of these identities, it gives a very complete picture, as if you were looking at me as just a woman, just Hispanic, and or just a person with a disability. And so why is an intersectional lens important? I am hopeful and positive that you have seen this picture before. And the reason of why we need to apply an intersectional lens is because equal treatment does not imply equitable treatment, right? And there's actually a missing panel in this picture where at some point we eliminate the barrier and everybody is, we eliminate the systemic barrier, which is represented here by the fence. And so this intersectional lens is necessary to highlight areas that we need to improve and be able to achieve substantive equality, leaving nobody behind. And we can't really understand who is being left behind unless we start looking at the intersection of the identities and how these lead to different experiences that for some people may not benefit from policies and programs that we try to reduce those inequalities. And so an intersectional lens is very necessary for the inclusive and responsive creation of programs and policies, as well as the efficient and effective use of the tailored resources, and ultimately for implementing approaches that lead to systemic change. So here, let me give you, I'll show you also some data. Let me just give you an idea of what diversity challenges in the recruitment and retention within STEM look like when we look at things on the aggregate. If you look at this figure, we know that the disparity by sex is such that while women represent approximately half, 50% of the workforce, they represent a much smaller percent of the STEM workforce, and the same applies for race and ethnicity. And we see these disparities here where the majority of those are represented are male and white. But when we look at the combination of these two, we see a different picture. So for example, among the percent of women who are in STEM, the majority are white. And when I present this data to individuals, they say, yes, Adriana, but the majority of the women in the US are white, so you're gonna have a high representation of them. And the answer is yes, but this picture doesn't reflect the distribution of women in the workforce by race and ethnicity. And so we have to really think about, when we are thinking about diversifying STEM, who are we recruiting? Who are we retaining? What are our policies doing to retain or not certain individuals? And when we look at the retention research, for the longest time, they have been concluding that for women, the majority of the reasons or the primary reason for leaving, for attrition within STEM, is due to family-related reasons, taking care of the children or things to that effect. But when we look at these data from an intersectional perspective, we see that the picture is completely different. That it might be true for some groups that family-related reasons are the predominant, family-related issues are the predominant reason for exiting the STEM workforce, which is the lavender bar. But in many other cases, the attrition from STEM is a result of systemic issues that are related to the hiring, promotion, and working conditions, and that's typical of the, particularly for Hispanic and Black women, where the jobs are not even available or the working conditions are awful. For example, research has shown that women of color, they are more likely than white women or men of any race to experience harassment and other negative experiences in the workforce. Moreover, Black women report having to provide more evidence, more convincing evidence of their achievements than men of any race to be considered competent within STEM. Hispanic women have higher challenges than other women for receiving support from women colleagues or even administrative staff in the workplace, and the Black women who are in leadership positions, this is all within STEM, are disproportionately punished for making mistakes, and they are perceived more negatively than Black men or white women. The whole notion of the angry woman in charge is real. And so what intersectionality is saying is that these experiences really are not a sexism, for example, is not a one-size-fits-all type of phenomenon, that we really have to, when we're thinking about the recruitment and retention of a diverse STEM workforce, we really have to apply an intersectional lens, because our efforts can go and continue homogenizing a group that is already well represented within STEM. So taking a very careful look at the intersecting identities is a way in which we can create programs and evaluate the existing programs to have a truly diverse STEM workforce. So how to do intersectionality. I've talked about why it matters. So how do we do this? And the first thing that we need to keep in mind is that we need to think differently about identity. It's not a discrete characteristic. It's more of it's a dynamic process. Think differently about equality, not equal treatment, but rather equitable treatment, and power, the power dynamics, and what that says about the voices of individuals who are underrepresented. We need to value a bottom-up approach to the planning, research, and the evaluation. So we need to really start understanding the needs and priorities of people across multiple identities, not just think, and the overarching message is don't think in discrete ways. We have to get data that is desegregated. And this is really counterintuitive to a lot of the people in administration who are used to thinking of aggregates, right? When we look at data from an institutional perspective, it is very rarely desegregated in the way that we need to be able to identify who is being left behind. We have to identify and rectify organizational and even our classroom practices that limit opportunities for individuals with different intersecting identities. So how do we do that is really through the development of services and evaluation of services and programs that are informed by those who are could be potentially left behind by the voices of individuals with a wide range of identities, and by having representation on campuses student organizations that cater to intersectionality, those are the individuals that we need to be talking to be able to develop these programs and then accordingly evaluate them. With intersectionality, it's a great concept and idea, but methodologically, it presents a lot of challenges for the evaluation of our programs. So, you know, we have this push and pull where, well, we're telling me to gather disaggregated data, but that presents difficulties for sample sizes and privacy of information, but particularly sample sizes. If we look at an intersection of, you don't see the cursor, and I just moved this slide. No. How do I go back? Okay, excuse me. So if you look at the intersection, right, gather a lot of identities and look at the intersection of them, it's only a very, very small group of people that fit that criteria. And so from an inference point of view, well, what can we say? Not much. And so that presents analytical challenges for the models that we are typically used to using for assessing outcomes in academia. And moreover, the good stuff, the really good useful data are often qualitative, which we don't know what to do with from a, you know, an institutional perspective. But luckily, more recently, we have, there have been a lot of developments or discoveries, really, because a lot of these models existed before through machine learning and artificial intelligence methods that are easily applicable. They can be cost effective and applied within institutional settings to identify people who are at risk and accordingly develop programs. So we have machine learning and estimation methods. These methods are for quantitative data. They are models that estimate the probability of success, for example, across the intersection of multiple identities. And these models are Bayesian. They use a Bayesian statistics, which means that they are not challenged by the small sample problem that we have when we use a frequentist approach, like what we typically see, like comparing percentages or averages, et cetera. So these models are in alignment with intersectionality theory, and they can overcome these methodological challenges that we face or criticisms when we're trying to apply an intersectional framework to understand who is being left behind. And for a qualitative perspective, there have been artificial intelligence models, like large language models that have been generated to automate the extraction of social inequality data from free text. So these advisor notes that are very, very informative about students, we can actually automate the extraction of information and supplement these structured institutional data. And this is applicable. This is easy to implement. It's implementable. We have a computer science department, as many colleges do. They can do this. And so I have a list of other resources here that I would like to provide you with. There's a lot of data out there on intersectionality. In particular, the Intersectionality Training Institute, they offer training for institutions and for individuals. So if, you know, from an administrator should really consider how they can benefit from a lot of the work that has been done out there. And so that's it for me. I would like to thank you. And I would be remiss if I don't mention my lab, the Applied Research on the Health and Adaptation of Minority Populations, which uses a lot of intersectionality for our work. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Espinosa. Our next panelist will be joining us from Zoom. And this will be Dr. Angela M. Kelly. So Dr. Kelly is a professor of physics and social and science education and the associate director of the Institute for STEM Education at Stony Brook University. Her roles include teaching and advising students in the PhD program in science education, directing the MAT physics program, and teaching undergraduate physics. Her research is focused on equity in pre-college and university physical science and engineering education, reform teaching practices in undergraduate science, sociocognitive influences on STEM access and participation, and quantum information science education. She completed her PhD in science education in 2006 at Teachers College at Columbia University here in New York. She is the recipient of the SUNY Chancellor's Award for Excellence in Teaching for the 2015-2016 academic year, the Provost Faculty Recognition Award for Excellence in Scholarship and Research from Lehman College, which is also part of the City University of New York, and that was in 2010, and the Outstanding Teaching Award from Teachers College, also at Columbia University in 2006. Dr. Kelly is the founder and director of the Biz Tech Regional Network of Southeast New York, which is a professional community of physics teacher educators. And so with that, I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Kelly.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure and an honor to be speaking with you today. And I really appreciate Dr. Hernandez and her team for inviting me. And I am so delighted to follow two fantastic speakers. I've learned so much already. So it's been really instructive to be part of this group. So as was mentioned, I am currently at Stony Brook University. I began my career at Lehman College, where I work closely with Bronx Institute. And I'm going to share with you some research that I've done related to intersectionality. So I'm going to start with some data, as the previous speakers have. And I think one important question we need to consider is why we should care specifically about equity in STEM more than anything else, or, you know, it does get a lot of attention. And I would say that the most important consideration here is that it's so critical to have diverse voices who are asking the questions about what is being researched in the scientific enterprise. So we are in a global economy with rapidly advancing technologies, and it's important to have a diversification of people who are making the decisions. Where are our healthcare dollars going to be spent? What research should be prioritized in advancing the human condition? So that's a really important piece of that. A secondary piece is that STEM careers are often pathways for socioeconomic advancement. People in STEM careers tend to make higher salaries than non-STEM fields, as you see here. And yet we see the proportion of women working with bachelor's degrees in STEM is quite low, 29%. And then if you look at Hispanic or Latino workers and Black or African-American workers, you also see low levels of representation. So I think all of us today have established or presented some data that establishes these inequities. When I think about barriers in STEM, a lot of my research has occurred at the high school level before students get to college. And I look specifically at access to an enrollment in these gateway courses that often decide whether or not students, for example, can apply to a school of engineering, whether they will be successful in their freshman physics experience. And as we heard previously, that sometimes you don't have great instructors in these precursor courses. You need your A team in those courses, but that is not always the case. So the pre-college context is very important. And I think about that in three ways. I think about it in terms of access, are courses even being offered, enrollment, who is actually enrolling in these courses, and also performance. So I'm going to talk about a couple of these pieces today. If we look at this table in the present slide, you will see some STEM courses listed here: chemistry, physics, computer science, pre-calculus. I tend to look at the physical sciences in my research because I am a physical scientist, but also these are considered advanced courses that are often important preparation for post-secondary STEM study. So in terms of access, you see that not all high schools even offer these courses. In many urban areas, fewer than half of high schools even offer a physics course, and that is true in New York City as well. So that represents a big problem. When you look at completers, I think we're doing pretty well in chemistry with high school chemistry, but if you look at the physical science, if you look at physics, computer science, and pre-calculus, you see that fewer than half of high school students take these courses. Now, if we dig deeper into the data, and these data are rarely disaggregated by intersectional group, but frequently they have male versus female. You see that for many of these courses, you have relative parity, with the exception of computer science, where we see more young men taking those courses than young women. If we move a little further to the right and you look at ethnicity, you see that there tends to be a higher representation of white and Asian students than Black and Hispanic students in some of these courses, including physics, including computer science, and including pre-calculus. And finally, on the far right, if you look at socioeconomic status, another category, you would see what is expected in terms of high socioeconomic status having more access to these courses and participating at a greater rate. This slide is a little bit fuzzy, but it just really goes into a bit more detail on what was in the previous slide in terms of courses offered, in particular high schools. I would encourage you to look at the Office for Civil Rights. Their data sets are quite interesting and useful to researchers. So I will advance to the next slide. And when we talk about the leaky pipeline, there is such nuance to these numbers. And we see that coming out of high school, if we look at women in particular, where we have parity in physics and chemistry and pre-calculus, when we look at the point at which they graduate from college, and our focus today is the undergraduate context, we have a lot of leakage that's occurring in terms of bachelor's degrees in engineering and physics. Remarkably, we are seeing parity in chemistry. I think that's very promising. But there's something between the high school, leaving high school and leaving college where we see some drop off in these mathematically intensive fields. We don't see too much drop off when you look at the doctoral degrees. So you don't see as much leakage in that part of the pipeline. You see it in chemistry a bit, but really not in physics and engineering. So we always have to look at data in terms of the contextual story. And in this case, we see some inequities in terms of disparate outcomes. So we've gotten some great definitions of the intersectional hypothesis today from the previous speakers. The one that I am using here is from Gavami and Peplau in terms of the perceptions of intersectional groups within social hierarchies being distinct. And I got very interested in the intersectional hypothesis as a theoretical framework when we were presented with the opportunity to look at intersectional groups in terms of advanced placement course offerings in STEM subjects in US high schools. So some points here that guided our framework were that these stereotypes are not additive, that they are unique and distinct for particular groups. They may reveal disparities that require remediation, but it's difficult to get the disaggregate data that shows us where to target special reforms. And these aggregate data often mask the complexities of STEM learning environments. So these marginalized intersectional groups share unique experiences. And as an example here, I have some research from women of color who may struggle for legitimacy due to issues such as stereotype threat, microaggressions, and dissonance with some of the cultural practices that are embedded in STEM fields. So this guided some research that I did with my doctoral student, Rob Krakel, and I'll share a little bit of the data from the College Board that we analyzed on the next slide. So we looked at advanced placement course offerings And these data were provided pre-COVID from the College Board. I think it was the academic year 2019. And we were looking at really the unique opportunity to analyze this disaggregated data set, which was enormous. I'm sorry I don't have the sample size here. That's an oversight on my part, but it was thousands of students, which is a rarity in intersectional research. So the College Board had these data first by male versus female, which they labeled as gender, the ethnic group, and then the intersectional group, which was a unique opportunity. So this showed some interesting patterns. If we look at the intersectional groups, you'll see that the Asian groups tended to have an overrepresentation in some of these advanced mathematics courses. We saw that the Black intersectional groups had some underrepresentation, and as well as the Hispanic groups. But that representation tended to get more pronounced when you went from a course like AP Statistics to AP Calculus AB, which is one semester of differential calculus. And then you go to the more advanced course, which is Advanced Calculus BC, which is differential and integral calculus. What's interesting also about the math data is you see that when we get to the AP Calculus BC, you see differentiation that might not exist in the other courses as well. So the mathematics courses showed that they, when we did inferential statistics, that there were significant differences between the representation of these intersectional groups in the population and the representation in advanced placement mathematics. And that was with a large effect size. Next, we looked at physics. And here, physics is unique. There are 4 AP Physics courses offered in US high schools. AP Physics 1 by far is taken by the most students, about 250,000 a year, where you'll have fewer than 50,000 taking the Physics C courses. The Physics C courses are calculus-based. So we can say, roughly speaking, from left to right on this table, we're going through more advanced physics coursework. Many students who go into engineering have taken AP coursework in high school. So we're looking at representation here. And again, you see among the intersectional groups that first of all, the male students tend to consistently have a higher representation than the female students across all of these exams. And you see disparities when you consider ethnicities traditionally underrepresented in STEM. So this gave us rather a stark picture of whether particular intersectional groups were participating in this potentially gateway pre-college STEM coursework that that was representative of their proportion in the US population. So again, these differences were significant with a large effect size. So this was a rather unique opportunity to have these data. You don't often see it. But part of my research is also qualitative in looking at factors that may influence STEM participation that are not so easily quantified, that often come out in interviews and observations with our high school and undergraduate students. Now, if you look at the research here, there are a lot of things on this slide that contribute to disparities in self-efficacy and self-concept. Self-concept meaning the identification of yourself as belonging in a particular discipline. And I'll just point out a few of the things here on this slide that have been shown in the research. And I would say that the number one thing that we encounter when interviewing young women is the pervasive feeling of inadequacy in STEM fields. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, the imposter syndrome, the feeling that they don't belong in the discipline. They're not smart enough. They're not good enough. And there are a lot of different reasons for that. If you look at the top thing on the left, expectation of required brilliance, there was a terrific article by Leslie and colleagues that suggested that in fields that are mathematically intensive, where you have the reputation that you have to be brilliant to be a part of that field, that is something that may be threatening to young women and young women of color to persist in the field. It also may be exacerbated by the instructors that they're encountering in these introductory courses. Do the instructors have a fixed mindset? Are they having 10 people stand up and say, you're going to fail? You know, that's communicating that students cannot grow and put in the work in order to be successful in the course. So these are some factors that may influence STEM participation and things that we need to look at in developing reforms to achieve more equitable outcomes. So lastly, I'll talk about a couple of studies of mine and how they related to intersectionality and the choice of pursuing a STEM career. This particular study was done with my doctoral student, Rich Gerns, and another doctoral student, Michelle D'Arienzo. And the picture here is from a summer camp that we had last year for quantum computing. And what was really surprising for us is that more young women than young men signed up for this camp. So we were really pleased about that. But one of the things that was a key guiding principle in establishing the structure of this camp was this theory of planned behavior. So we draw upon a lot of theories from psychological research. And in planned behavior, students make academic decisions dependent upon self-efficacy, self-concept, do I belong in the field, and their expectancy of what their careers are going to be like when they're actually in that field. And part of that is seeing people who are like them in the field. And so that guided our work in the camp. It also guided some research we did with school counselors, because in looking at what influences students in their post-secondary career aspirations, we found that school counselors often had an outsized role in that. So we did some research with school counselors. We did some professional development for them. And we found that they possess some latent biases on who belongs in STEM fields and whether they often struggled with, should I encourage the student to pursue advanced science coursework if I think that student is going to fail? So this was problematic, and we definitely feel like we had some influence there in changing their attitudes from pre to post participation in this professional development. But these two studies together showed different ways in which students' self-concept can be influenced. And that's a very powerful predictor and influencer on what career students will choose. And the last piece of research I'll share with you here was with two of my doctoral students, Jennifer Gatz and Gada Neme. If any of you went to Bronx Science, Gada Neme is a physics teacher there. And she and I and Jennifer did some research on the idea of external validation in STEM. So this is from qualitative research with over 50 high school, undergraduate, graduate, and career physicists. And we found that one thing that really influenced their choice of STEM, first of all, and choice to persist in STEM was due to socialization in the major, was due to faculty interactions that were positive and encouraging, and was due to research experiences as undergraduates. Participating in undergraduate research is an incredibly powerful means to encourage groups who are traditionally underrepresented in STEM to persist in the fields. I can't overstate that finding. Across the board, the young women who participated in research, and we recently did a study with 10 Hispanic women astronomy majors, the socialization, the mentoring, the research, all critical factors in their sense of self-concept and self-efficacy. Those research experiences really moderated the tensions associated with self-doubt and unwelcoming classroom cultures. And that was evidenced by their sense of autonomy, their sense of competence, and their social relatedness to other people in the field. So in conclusion, just a few thoughts here that are really consistent with the other speakers. The first one is the need for more transparent data collection. The disaggregate data that gives us the sample sizes that are often necessary to do some of this inferential statistical work. And that actually helps us to contextualize the disparities that exist in STEM fields. So Adriana talked about things like decision trees and machine learning, and those are really valuable tools as well. But we also need this transparent data to, even if we have small sample sizes, to get to that point. I am always a proponent for removing STEM gateway access barriers before college, encouraging students before they come to college that their course choices should match their career aspirations, whether that's through educating students, school counselors, families. We often see that at Stony Brook, that students come in not understanding fully what precursor courses would have best prepared them for the work that they had to do as undergraduates. Classroom and departmental cultures, very influential, very influential. The climate of the classroom, the attitudes of the instructors. One public humiliation can result in a young woman of color deciding to change her major that day. And there are a lot of different ways that this rears its head, whether it's through combative verbal interactions that often happen in science classrooms, the gendered roles that students have in handling lab equipment, the microaggressions. There are many ways it happens. So targeting reforms towards improving these cultures in the classroom would be very helpful. And my final point here is that mixed methods research approaches are often very useful in deciding how to target reforms and remove barriers, especially for intersectional groups. If you have a reform or an opportunity for women, it may favor white women over women of color. And if you have a reform or an opportunity for ethnicities underrepresented in STEM, it may favor men over women. So we have to think more deeply about how we are approaching reforms in terms of intersectional groups. So with that, I thank you so much for the opportunity to share my thoughts with you today. And I'm happy to turn it over to our leaders to start the discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. We have plenty of time, I think, for the next section, which is the section of questions and answer. But before we do that, I wanted to reverse a little the program and do this now before the end, because I will forget to do this. And that is thanking the people who help us to put this together, Dr. Sanchez, Doctora Sanchez, who is the program director of the CUNY Dominican Studies Institute. She's sitting here. And also the technical team led by Dr. Pierre Lawson, the associate director of the CUNY Dominican Studies Institute, Ian Kaufman, who is the Mellon Grant coordinator at the Institute, and Sheldon from City College and his team. Thank you. Thank you so much for this. And of course, my co-moderator. And before I go into this section of questions and answers, Dr. Hernandez, my co-moderator and I were thinking and talking behind, allá, atrás, no? And you promised to say something to us that I did not give you the chance to share that. And we wanted to hear that. And then we're gonna go into the section of questions and answers.
My story about how I could have been a great engineer.
Exactamente.
Me
Yeah,
that.
please, please, please.
So I grew up in a poor hood in Miami, and poverty but I've always loved math and logic, and I'm great at math, and I've always thought to myself, maybe if my mom spoke English, or if I spoke English by the time I got to elementary school, or if I had access to those AP classes, like Dr. Kelly just mentioned, I would have been an engineer, folks. Like I'm telling you. And so these days I build Legos to kind of satisfy that need, but it's every day in my life that I think about these issues. I'm like, if only, or if someone read to me at home, right? And my vocabulary was higher by the time I got to high school, and my mom still brags, mi hija es una doctora, but I say, I don't know CPR, mom. Like, don't make sure you mention that to people, I'm still Dr. Hernandez, but not the doctor, right? That she dreamed of, or the engineer. And so that's the story about how I think that I would have made a great engineer, folks. I love the concept of engineering, and I just wish that I had the opportunity. And it's hard to not see these systems, right, of injustice, of power that rob that from me and so many others. And that's why I do the work.
Qué bueno, qué bueno. Muchísimas gracias. And I, as you were sharing that story with us, I also remember that I like a lot of numbers. And people who know me, they know that I cannot say anything unless I count it, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So who knows? Qué bueno. So we are now in the section of questions and answers. And we will take questions from the physical bodies that are here and the other colleagues that are outside the space. My moderator will be taking those questions online, and I will be taking the questions in the flesh. Professor Steven, Hunter College.
Fascinating presentation. First, sorry about that. Yeah. First question for Dr. Hernandez. You had a very interesting statistic about Hispanic women in associate degrees in STEM, and then a huge drop off at the bachelor level.
Right.
I'm wondering if you have something in between, like what is the percentage of these young women that successfully transition from associates to bachelors? That's probably got to be in there, and that could be very useful in terms of figuring out what the leaks are in the pipeline.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm wondering if Dr. Kelly has any more background on that, because I'm not sure. In some of the data that I'm getting from the National Center for Ed Statistics, like even some of these numbers they're presenting this way for the first time, and so. I must admit this is not my area, and so I put some numbers together. I'm not sure, and I'm. Do you know why the drop off happens so sharply like that? Like why these women stop at the associate?
In many cases, these represent terminal degrees. And they, something that we need to understand is where do they go to work and what kind of jobs do they do? Are these services still? And because that also speaks to a disparity in leadership positions within STEM.
Just a quick note on that. I think improved articulation between the community colleges and the senior colleges in the same system could really be helpful. I have a comment actually piggybacking on one of Dr. Kelly's very useful points. 40-year career for me has really cemented the idea that research experience is extremely important. That's what leads students to a life of science. And there are many programs. They're called REUs, research experience for undergraduates at universities and national labs all over the country. City College in particular has very strong STEM enterprise. So all science students and engineering students should be encouraged to seek faculty mentors on campus and to seek these summer programs. They're out there, and there's a lot of capacity. And finally, every Hispanic STEM student should know about SACNA, Society for Advancement of Chicano and Native Americans in Science. It's the largest STEM organization for minority students. Enormous support network nationally. I believe City College should have its own chapter. That's a story for another day.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and every dean and chair should pay for whatever association fees or
Absolutely.
memberships are associated with it.
Yeah.
Gracias. Gracias.
And I'd like to say something else about research experiences that I think is so important. And that is that so often when we teach science, students are trained to get the right answer, to get something that is absolutely correct. And so therefore we encourage a culture where students are afraid of failure and they are embarrassed by failure. And in a research space, it is a safe space for failure, where you are learning the practices of the profession, which often involve a great deal of failure. So I think that that is one aspect of research experiences that is so important for us to capture. And in terms of the associate degrees, I have done some research with community college contexts, but haven't seen that disaggregated data. But I have noticed in my own research the uptick in Hispanic graduates that's clearly shown in science and engineering indicators. And I think the untold story is Hispanic and Latina women who are driving that increase, and it really needs to be shared.
Okay, I guess I'm next. So thank you all so much for the talk. My name is Kendra Kruger. I run STEM education and outreach programming at CUNY's Advanced Science Research Center, just down the street. And my background is in engineering and electrical engineering, and I also have taught for some time about like decolonizing certain narratives within STEM education. So I'm kind of curious within your research, how much that's come up. You spoke a little bit about like advancing curriculums in STEM and understanding some of the narratives that exist within like science, in the scientific culture and philosophy and methodology that have undermined systems of wisdom from world cultures and community knowledge that I think, you know, also is part of retaining students in STEM, of like, how do we acknowledge like this, also the ways that like science has been extractive or harmful to communities of color or underrepresented groups, in order to like kind of address and understand that intersectionality of even like the social justice aspects of science. So I'm curious if that's come up in your research, or you feel that's like a relevant topic as well. And then also if you know of like other trainings or programs for faculty members to educate them more on these ideas of intersectionality as well.
That's a great question. I love that question. I'm all about, you know, thinking against the grain and, you know, dismantling the whole thing, like, and doing it. But the problem is that when folks are doing it, right, and they're thinking against the grain, oftentimes they're the only one in the department or in the school, and it's exhausting to exist like that, right? When you're the only one who is challenging maybe, you know, that intro to biology, that 101, you know, and it's in public health, it's in sociology and courses that are, you know, aiming to change the narrative, to bring in these what I think should be ways of thinking. I think in public health is easier. I think we are, and I say we, I'm not an epidemiologist, but I'm an epi department. I think we're a little bit more open. You know, at Dornsife, our motto literally is health is a human right. Right. So when you work at a place like that, it's inherently easier to kind of like challenge the status quo. But I cannot imagine what that would be like in a department that's like 90% white. Like I literally cannot, I can't imagine what that work is like. And then you're doing it day in, day out. And you're doing your research and you're mentoring. It's not sustainable. And so I think it was Dr. Kelly that was talking about it. We need to change the whole thing, but how do we do it? And I think STEM presents a unique challenge in that its lack of diversity it's a uphill battle. But I think asking those questions, and it starts by who's at the table and who's making those decisions, right? When we bring in these diverse student, faculty, staff, right, that get the right and the power to make these decisions, and it gets easier and easier, right? And then we can have a group of like 3 or 4 faculty who are like, yo, this intro class is whack, yo, like we don't have a single speaker of color, like, but it takes a person of color to realize that, to challenge the status quo. It's hard work. It's hard work.
And in terms of the training, I just want to underscore the Intersectionality Institute is a really wonderful, it offers a lot of great training opportunities for institutions, meaning for faculty, staff, as well as individuals who are interested in this line of work on all fronts. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for, these wonderful presentations, the 3 of them. I've learned a lot. I'm actually a professor of molecular biology at John Jay College. And I have a couple of comments before. I think the research experiences are great, but they cannot reach all the students. I just wanted to bring that to the table. We have worked on this for years, and it's just not possible to offer every student, right, research experience individually. So I see challenges there to actually achieve equity, right? Because, it's just part of the deal. So maybe cures or classroom undergraduate research experiences that are embedded within the curriculum should be more supported and pushed forth to actually, achieve that. That is, that's kind of a side comment, but we have a particular challenge at John Jay and in the sciences, biological and physical sciences. That is, we lose a lot of Latinas, African-American students after year 1. And these students do not go away. They go to other majors and graduate successfully. And I, as the one Latina in the department, took on the challenge of trying to do something about this. So I've been funded by NSF to do 2 things. One of them is to help the faculty change the curriculum to include the cultural, aspect of it is that our students, we have, I think is close to 60% African-American and Latino students, right? And then the other one to build programs to support these Latina students and African-American students that are leaving the major in very large proportions after year 1 to other majors and graduating successfully. So my question to you is, every time I go in to explain this and try to get more buy-in from the leadership, there comes the issue of how could we actually support all the students, right? So the issue easily gets moved from those that are at the intersection of the highest need to the needs on our schools that need a lot of resources, right? And we struggle overall to graduate students in the sciences because there is a large need. I hope that my question makes sense. I kind of need help to make the argument that supporting these students that are in the highest need at this intersection in the sciences is key to support everyone, because we are developing the strategies, right, that actually could be successful. I don't seem to have all the elements to, to make the bigger case. So I was hoping that you guys that have made have talked about these issues so clearly could also help in helping me argue for, working within the intersection and putting, a lot of effort into making this happen, specifically for these students. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you made the argument just now very, very well. helping those who are at higher risk is helping everybody. And I, you know, based on Dr. Kelly's presentation, we can see the factors that are leading to the drop off, right? In addition to, and these classes, there are certain classes that happen after the first year. I can think of calculus as the first one, that has been identified as one of the classes that is kind of like leading to that leaky pipeline, to the drop off. And so this fixed thinking from the faculty and just creating or exacerbating these perceptions of ineptitude are leading to that drop off. And that by providing additional services to prevent that, in addition to changing the classes, you are helping all. I mean, I believe your argument is very strong. It's just that there are people that are unwilling to hear it. So you just have to keep saying it. And in the same way as, why do we want to diversify STEM? Because it's a social mobility approach. It's the same idea, right? It's the same argument. It's just now applied to those who are at a higher risk. Yeah, I see it. I don't know why others aren't. But I guess we just have to continue saying it.
Dr. Kelly was more senior than me.
Oh.
Oh, good. I can unmute. Okay. Yes, I'm sorry. I lost my connection for a bit. But I agree with you about the CURE research experience in the classroom. And I would say that we have a very strong DEI group in my department, and a lot of these changes in introductory teaching have to come from the ground up. So you have to, often with senior members of the department and younger members in the department, have this grassroots effort to include instruction at that level. Something that we also found has been very helpful is summer bridge programs. That is a program in place for years at University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Their Meyerhoff program is a great example of how to promote the retention of traditionally marginalized students in STEM. We tend to accept the highest performing students in their high school classes, but these students may not have had the option to take physics, and of getting them up to speed on a level playing field before they come to us that fall. So I think that the summer bridge could be a great way to improve the retention rates of these groups.
I think for me, again, junior, right? So very naive to many things. I think, you know, the brutal murder of George Floyd in 2020 and the protests ignited this widespread DI initiative on campuses. And I don't know if your department and your campus was one of those that kind of leaned into DI work and funding. And I think we start by saying that any work that's anti-racist inherently benefits all students. Anything that is at its core anti-racist is going to help your queer students, it's going to help women, it's going to help first-gen students, it's going to help students at those various intersections. Lately, I think I've been leaning into those kind of conversations because folks that like, except like Florida and Texas that have like these anti-DEI bills, they're still kind of, you know, following along with those DEI efforts, and they're like anti-racist efforts, and they're buying into anti-racist pedagogy and training, and they're believing that this is important. You know, there's a segment of the population that does believe that this is important. So that's the way that I think I've been able to have these conversations with folks, and not even using the word intersectionality, but using the word anti-racist and why this matters. And if we are an anti-racist department, then everyone benefits at its core. That's one strategy that I've been using. So if you have buy-in for anti-racist policies, then maybe you can stretch it out. But I'm happy. I wonder what other folks think about that.
All right, if there's no more questions in the room, or at this point, we're going to turn it over and take some questions from Zoom. So this. Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Abe Wolcott, San Jose State University, a part of the Cal State University system. I'm also a physical chemist. There's been a lot of different talks about the research experience, mentored a lot of students and brought them to Department of Energy facilities in the Bay Area. That's always been a big push where my students have felt that having these experiences firsthand and seeing the networks and interacting with scientists has been impactful. You know, now at PhD programs at Stanford, you know, so on and so forth. I'd like to know if you've quantified that at all, you know, between different groups who did not have research experiences versus those that did. My other comment is for the last 35 years, 40 years, we've had the MARC program, the RISE program, McNair Scholar, LSAMP, and many other well-funded programs that have targeted Black researchers, Native American, Hispanic researchers. The other comment was about trying to get more research into every classroom. Cal State Fullerton requires all of their students in the chemistry department to have research experiences. It then, you know, causes a lot of work to be done by faculty members because they have to account for each student having a research experience. And then my other question is, and I have an NSF grant for this, which is for STEM efficacy and STEM identity, is have you collected any data on the use of advanced technology? So we're using extended reality and virtual reality in advancing STEM efficacy and STEM identity. And so I kind of had two questions at the beginning, at the end, and then some side comments. So I appreciate everything. You guys are wonderful.
Thank you. I think Dr. Kelly is well poised to answer the comparison data. I just have anecdotal and experiential data on participating in REU, but Dr. Kelly?
Sure. I think that, you know, we still struggle with sample sizes within our own institution where we have 400 physics and astronomy majors. And, you know, it's about between 25 and 30% women. And then they have to agree to participate in the research. So the sample size is always a challenge. So a lot of my data are anecdotal as well. But I want to address your last question. We do collect a lot of data from our summer camp programs on quantum computing. And still the sample size is about 50 students, so not huge, but enough to do some statistical analyses. And we have seen that the young women did not improve their self-concept. And when we interviewed them to ask more deeper, more nuanced questions about that, some of them were focused on choosing STEM careers that contributed to human welfare and contributed to the social good. And sometimes they could not see that with artificial intelligence. They see the bad things that are happening with AI. They see some, you know, some things that are happening on social media that are assisted by AI that are not positive. So I think that it's incumbent upon us to present a fuller picture of careers in the field and how this actually benefits the human condition. Otherwise, I think that many young women will not gravitate towards these fields if they don't see value contributed that is consistent with their own values.
Not my area of expertise. I yield.
Hi, thank you all for this event today and for participating. My name is Angel Rosario. I am one of the general surgery resident physicians at Columbia University. I'm Dominican. I grew up in Harlem, first generation, first to college. One of the interesting, I think, perspectives from the medical field is that STEM essentially encompasses all of these components into our ability to even get foot in the door to go into medical school and to become physicians. So I see the drop off as I mentor dozens of students from historically marginalized backgrounds, BIPOC, QDPOC students, and see huge drop-offs, freshman, sophomore year, from essentially, failing calculus or, not doing so well in all of these STEM topics that were covered, essentially prevent the entry into the medical profession. And this is something that it's more so of an advocacy point to say that, when we think about the intersection of identities, and also that intersectional work is also, social change and social justice work and transformative work. I think the medical partnerships with STEM and the healthcare field really highlight this well, because not only are we seeing less doctors of marginalized backgrounds, making it, but we're also seeing health disparities that result that come about as a result of this. So I want to really just advocate for, as we kind of think about, what we can do in the future. I think healthcare provides a really tangible result of what happens when, even at the level of STEM, which for us is, a lot of it is pre-medical courses, if we're not even able to get students and, our communities at that point, then we also can't get them to the point where they can advocate for structural changes in our healthcare system that can help to eliminate the health disparities that we see. So any comments on that would be, I would love to hear, and also just want to advocate for these sorts of partnerships to exist.
Thank you for that comment. So whereas we have improved our thinking about the groups that should benefit from additional intervention, or at least the groups that are underrepresented, we have not changed how we teach the courses. And Dr. Kelly had talked about this fixed thinking, and how students are or standing up and say, 10 of you will get A's and the rest of you are going to fail. Introducing a class as saying, this is going to be really hard. All of that happens, and that is very discouraging. So we are sort of fighting an uphill battle when we think about, well, we see the drop off. We see what happens after the first year. We have all these many students who are eager and excited to go into STEM fields, including healthcare. And then suddenly they are confronted with the reality that, well, maybe they didn't have the AP courses, and maybe they just, don't have the right approach to studying the class, but they are told you're not good enough. And I have sat in department meetings where faculty say, well, because the students fail, we have so many students that fail calculus, that means they can't do math. That means they should not go into the field that they want to do. And I get really, I'm tenured, so I can get all upset. And I do, and I confront them. I say, are you kidding me? Are you really thinking that is your way of thinking, that because a person fails at something on the first time, that means they can't do it and shouldn't? So, but we have that mindset in the classroom. And when our students are facing that, it's easier to just say, well, I'll just go and do something else. So we have the students that start with engineering and maybe end up doing something that is not what they wanted to do, because they are seeing that, well, I don't belong there. So certainly we have to raise awareness about how our classes are taught, and the mindset that we're communicating to our students, that failing at a class or not necessarily doing well implies that you shouldn't. That is just needs to, that message needs to just be erased. And the more we educate the faculty, the better it's going to be. We, unfortunately, we have these conversations among people who agree. All of us have this, we are interested in this topic. that's not necessarily shared across the board. So we need to do a better job at advocating for its importance. But it really starts with what our students see in the classroom and who's talking to them and how they are.
Yeah, I mean, and I would add is naming these racist systems, right? In those faculty meetings and those in the classroom, I mean, I was that student in intro to biology that I failed. Then they pushed me into social work. That sucked. Then they pushed me into sociology. And that's why I'm here today. But I was a pre-med major and I wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to be a like a medical doctor, not an academic. And I got pushed out. And not because I truly believe it wasn't because I wasn't smart. I left college for the first time at 18, 8 hours away from Miami by myself. I didn't even know how far Tallahassee was from Miami. Like literally till the night before, like I was so unprepared. And then I get to Florida State and there's all these white people that don't look like me. And I felt like such an outsider. And then I'm in like this auditorium with like 400 people in this biology class. And I was taking calc because I did well in high school in math, didn't do well there. And then I took like a philosophy class because I wanted to do like, I never got a chance to do AP physics, those AP classes, you know, or IB classes. Failed philosophy because I wasn't prepared. It was rough. You know, I made it, but that's how I got pushed out of pre-med and ended up, you know, in the social scientists. And to this day, I don't think it was because I wasn't smart enough. I was underprepared and no one was there to say, yo, Steph, like try again, you know, or I got pushed out. I got sent to an advisors and said, you either change your major or you drop out. And I was like, I can't drop out. My mom's gonna kill me. I have 4 years and I have to show up with a degree, you know? And so it's an uphill battle and it's most days it's discouraging.
Thank you. All right, we have about 5 minutes left, so we're gonna switch over. We got a couple of questions from Zoom. So this one is for you, Dr. Hernandez. So in order to understand admission, retention, and graduation, we may overly focus on socio-demographic, individual, or family characteristics. In your opinion, what quantitative metrics can be collected to illustrate the difficulty to get into a STEM program or behavioral or I think it's PhD programs? And then there's some examples. For example, STEM departments take pride in having a low percentage of admission rates, and many public health programs have high percentages in admission.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, cringe. Yeah, I think, and again, I'm learning a lot of this on the fly as I navigate the tenure track myself, and the conversations on admissions that I sit through with some of my colleagues, I'm like, yo, that is racist. Or conversations about testing and wanting to bring testing back. I'm like read a book. You know, like we sit on our high horses over PhDs and look down on students who failed intro biology, yet we don't understand how racism is related to like GRE scores or SAT scores. It's so okay. So what indicators? Because I could go on. And I'm thinking about admissions rates. I think there's in public health, you know, we look at things like neighborhoods and poverty rates, the intergenerational transfer of time and money. Some of my work that's looking at that. These are all factors that impact our ability to access higher education. It's not just your high school GPA, and these things should be taken into account, right? Like, who has access to higher education, and why, right? And maybe if you did fail that intro biology class, be given a second opportunity to take that class. W's, I got a lot of W's on my transcripts, you know, and be given the opportunity to retake these intro classes and to succeed. And so in terms of the indicators, I think we have to rethink the whole thing. I think we need to start fresh, and it's going to take people like my colleagues here who are in STEM fields leading the charge.
Bueno, if there is another question from the people that are sitting in here. We will take it. The online people don't have no more questions. And so, uno, dos, going. Bueno, muchísimas gracias. We are very, very grateful for your presence here in your exchange of ideas with the panelists. We are very grateful for you taking the time to share with us your knowledge. I think we succeeded in the sense that your presentations were so different one from the other, and at the same time convergían, ¿no? Thank you so much. Thank you to my co-principal investigators for being here and the one that are online as well. Y gracias to the people who also help us put this together. And we will see you again in another occasion. Muchísimas gracias. ¿Sí?
Thank you so much.
¿Cómo no?